Okay, and I'm recording. So what I have is I downloaded a different, just a third-party software to record the videos from now on, because too many people are having problems playing them. I'm talking about the videos of this, right? The videos of our class meetings, where some of you are nice enough to show up. Most people seem to not do that. I hope they're checking out the videos of our sessions, but there have been problems with those videos and they disappear after 2 weeks and I can't edit them in any way or rename them or provide a link. I have no power over them, so I got tired of that. I'm using a different software now to record, so hopefully the videos will be better, right, for the times that you miss class. Hopefully that'll work better. The sound might be slightly worse because this is all technical stuff. Maybe you don't care about that. The sound might be worse because the big blue button has some cool noise gates, so that the mic cuts off when it's pretty quiet. Things like that. Which the software that I'm using to record does not. So when you're listening to this live, the sound quality will be better than when you're listening to the video. Yeah. Okay. I don't think any of that affects you too much right now, right here. Let's see. Was there anything else about that? No. It's just I'm running like... yes, we are recording, Marley. Thank you, Marlo. I put together Marlo and Varley into Marley. It's Marlo. Okay. It's just I want to explain too. If sometimes I have to. It happens a lot. Yeah. I've got all these different moving pieces here while I'm trying to also present the main content, which is abstract philosophical stuff. And then I've got surrounded by all this technical stuff, right? I've got my own mic over here that I'm running through a guitar pedal as a compressor to make the sound quality slightly better. I've got a separate webcam for my computer. I've got the Prezi software that I'm running for the presentation. I'm running the Bandicam to capture the screen for the videos, and then I'm using this big blue button to do it all, and then I have to share screens on big blue button to Prezi. It's very complicated. If every now and then I have to take a second to calibrate everything, you'll know why. Okay. So far we haven't had a whole lot of technical issues though, so that's been good. Okay, were there any questions or comments, concerns? Thoughts? Oh, the other thing I did too is I upgraded my Prezi. Again, the Prezis are these presentations, right? The ones that you're seeing down below. And if you miss the meeting or if you want to study for a quiz, check out those presentations, right? The Prezis. I make all those myself. Everything in there I made myself, and so it's going to be most reflective of what I want you to know. So studying for quizzes or the midterms, very good idea to look at these presentations. They really narrow down what I am looking for, because you got to narrow stuff down when you're doing philosophy. There's so much to talk about. Anyway, the other component I did is I upgraded my Prezi, so that now I could control the presentation with my phone. And I no longer have to switch screens to do it, which is nice. So we got to move on to Aristotle. We're getting a little bit behind already. I don't know what I'm thinking. This always happens like this every single semester. Today we're supposed to start on Descartes, René Descartes. We're supposed to be done with the ancient era, but we're not. We still got Aristotle to talk about. So unfortunately, I'm going to give him short shrift a little bit. We're not going to go into Aristotle in great detail, even though, he's in many ways more prolific than Plato even was. Aristotle supposedly, we don't have these anymore, but Aristotle supposedly also wrote dialogues like Plato did. Some ancient people said that they were better than Plato's dialogues. If those existed, if that's a real thing, they're gone now. We have no access to any dialogues. Aristotle's writings that have survived were not in that format like Plato. Instead, what survives from Aristotle is people tend to think that they're his personal notebooks, notes that he would use for lecture. So a lot of times it's very compact and very dense and very difficult to read. And there's so much going on, and it's just amazing that this is, in the 4th century BC. Aristotle is quite a bit different from Plato in many ways, even though Aristotle was Plato's student, right? Aristotle went to Plato's academy when Aristotle was a young man trying to find out what to do with his life, right? He found this weird place, an academy, where you go to study knowledge, where you go to learn math and to think about the world and to study what we now think of as some sort of proto-science, right? Although Plato was very much into the abstract stuff, as we've already seen, right? Remember, he kind of Plato, remember this, right? This is an important thing about Plato, does not really think that this stuff around us is really, really real. And so knowledge of this doesn't count as a whole lot. He calls it opinion, right? The real stuff is these abstract forms that have an immaterial existence, and that everything here in this physical world is just a reflection of. Aristotle is quite a bit different. Aristotle is very grounded in the everyday reality, and he also really criticizes Plato's idea of the forms. He just does not think that you need to postulate forms as some sort of extra existence, some sort of extra physical existence out there somewhere. Aristotle just does not agree with that view, okay? So that's why when we saw that picture, the School of Athens, when we looked at Plato, remember Plato is pointing up. Plato's pointing up to that realm of the forms, that heavenly realm where everything is perfect, right? Sound familiar? Aristotle, on the other hand, has this gesture, and he seems to be saying, yes, but what about this world here, right? There's a whole world around us that we can explore and think about. So a lot of what Aristotle was doing early on is coming up with different ways to think about reality outside of us, especially thinking in terms of all the different categories that there are, basically coming up with a framework so that we can do science, coming up with a way of dividing the world, a systematic way, so that we can actually use our senses to build knowledge of the world in a systematic way. Right? So a lot of Aristotle is concerned with that. Right? So he's setting the stage for science. So that's why he's sometimes called the father of science, right? Because it's philosophy. Of course, philosophy is a general search for knowledge. So I argue that includes science. But Aristotle, rather than Plato, is called the father of science because Aristotle was very empirical, right? He was much more of an empiricist than a rationalist. He did not just think of things in his head. He actually went out and studied. Aristotle actually went and classified all these different animals and dissected frogs, and he was interested in nature, the natural world around us. He did not just think of this as a subpar realm, a realm of becoming that's not important, like Plato did. For Aristotle, reality is very much a vibrant, buzzing, present thing right here that we can explore and gain systematic knowledge about. But you got to do it right? You have to understand basic principles. You have to have a general metaphysical framework. You got to know which questions to ask and how to ask them. So Aristotle does a lot of that. So I'm going to just give you two, really these are both, they go hand in hand, the idea of the four causes and matter and form. Matter and form are just two of these four causes that we're going to talk about. Okay, so first we'll talk about what he calls the four causes, and then we'll zero in on matter and form. And hopefully you can sort of see the seeds of scientific thinking in here, okay? So, let's see, was there anything general I wanted to say about Aristotle apart from that? Like I said, I'm trying to go through them a little bit quickly so we can at least start Descartes today. I feel bad, but on the other hand, we've done a lot of work on the ancient Greeks, and so just to keep the semester going, we gotta keep going and we gotta jump right to Descartes. So I'm gonna try to do this somewhat quickly. So maybe if there was other stuff, I won't say it now. Okay. The four causes. So Aristotle is famous for this, okay? Aristotle's four causes. If you type in Google Aristotle's F, it'll probably autocomplete with four causes, right? So even your computer knows what's up. Now, causes, we tend to think of causes as in one specific way, that there's really just one kind of cause for everything, right? A physical cause. For example, here's this marker. Oh, it fell. What caused it to fall? Well, gravity and me letting go of it, right? That's what we think of as a cause. So the word cause here, it's kind of a problematic explanation. I prefer almost to think of these as explanations. Okay, so when Aristotle says causes, think of it instead of four explanations or four questions that we can ask about objects and entities in the physical world. Okay, so basically, different ways of explaining an object. I have to readjust my box here that I'm recording with. Okay, you can't see it. I'm doing something important. Okay, here we go. These are just four different ways of asking questions about something. And this can be anything in the natural world, okay? It's also anything in the artificial world. We can ask this question about hammers as well as trees, okay? So let me first quickly go through them, okay? Just introduce you, and then I'll look at examples, okay? So the first cause, the efficient cause, or the first question that we can ask about anything is, what caused this to exist in the first place? How did this come into being? Right? We ask that. That's a scientific question, isn't it? That's the beginning of a scientific question, just to go around looking at things in the natural world, for example, and asking, why is this here? Right? Why does this exist? There's different ways that you can answer that, of course, right? So if it's about an animal, for example, you could first say, well, it was born to its parents, right? Its parents created it. But then, of course, you want to ask, well, how did they come to be? How did all these critters come to be? Where did all these critters come from? And then you're again asking a scientific question, right? Where do life forms come from? It would take a while for us to actually answer that question scientifically, but with evolution. But first step is ask the question, right? And so this is one question you can ask about anything. How did this come into being? Then we can ask about the formal cause. What is its structure or its design? How does it work? How is it all put together? Yeah? So you can think about the anatomy of a zebra, for example, right? So now we're getting into biology or something like that, right? It's systematically studying the structure of objects around us. Even a tree, right? We learn about tree rings and how old they are because of that, right? This is all having to do with inquiring into the basic structure of the object, the basic formal features, as they're called. We can also ask, related to that, about the material cause. What is the object made of? What sort of stuff is it? Now remember, that was a question that the pre-Socratics had, wasn't it? In fact, the pre-Socratics kind of had all these causes all mixed in and jumbled together. And this is one of the cool things about Aristotle. He tries very hard to be very, very meticulous to make sure that we're talking about exactly the right object, the right concept. With the pre-Socratics, it wasn't always clear whether they were talking about the efficient cause, the formal cause, or the material cause. Or, as we'll see, the fourth one, the final cause. It's actually called the final cause. But that's simply, what is the object made of, right? What is stuff, was our question, right? So you can ask first, what is a giraffe made of, right? You can see it's got all these different components, right? It's got the flesh part, it's got the hairs, it's got the bones, it's got all these objects. But then you can also zero in on those objects and ask what they're made of, right? What are zebra bones made of? Right? Well, lots of calcium and some other stuff, right? Okay, and you can zoom in further. What is calcium made of, right? You can keep asking about the material cause. We've sort of been doing this, right? And there's a question that gets raised there is how long can you do that? How much can you zoom in, right? What is calcium made of? Well, now we know it's made of these molecules, and then you can ask, what are those molecules made of? Well, now we know they're made of atoms, and atoms, of course, it has its structure. Then it gets a little bit dicey, right? But we could still ask the question. We're still curious. Well, what are those electrons made out of then, right? What are they made of? What is their material cause? And then finally, and I'm going to give more concrete examples of this in just a second, okay? The final cause. What is the purpose or function of the object? What does it do? And sometimes it might have several functions, of course, right? But simple example, like the hammer example, right? That's pretty easy. Material cause, what is it made of? Well, it's made of wood and metal, right? Formal cause, what's its structure or design? Well, it's got this neat design where you can hold the handle here, and then to get full force, right, you've got the big metal hard thing up here, right? That's what it looks like. What is the final cause? What is its purpose? Well, mostly to hit nails into something, right? And its design is directly related to its formal cause. The age of an object. That's very interesting. Yeah. Now, he talks about various categories in other places, okay? So he's got all sorts of other things like age, but also relation, like where, or location, like where's it located, things like that. Those are going to be more specific. These four causes are the most general. So that's a very good question, but the age, I would say it's in its own category. You'll have to look elsewhere. Yeah, way more than this. Aristotle has a whole book, notes, called the categories, and he goes through all these different categories that he thinks the world is divided into. So age might be one of those, for example. Yeah, so there's way more than that. This is sort of the most basic level of looking at an object. Yeah, so good question. So the purpose or function of an object, like a hammer, hits stuff hard, and the way it's designed and its material is actually part of what allows it to have that function, isn't it? So that's something to keep in mind, right? The formal cause and the material cause need to be just right to get the final cause, right? If you change the structure or the design of a hammer to be completely different, it might not be functional anymore. If instead of making it out of wood and metal, you made it out of leaves, right? It would not work either, right? So you can see how the formal and the material cause are related to the final cause. But let me give just a more straightforward visual example. Instead of a hammer, let's talk about a chair. So what is the efficient cause then? Here I'm quizzing you, right? I no longer have the definitions up. Does anyone remember? What would the efficient cause of a chair be? I'm going to wait just a second to see if you're awake. To sit, that's its function. That's its final, yes, that's its final cause. So you're on the right track. It's one of the causes, but I'm asking about the efficient cause. Right, exactly. Something built it. Exactly, right. Carpenter, yes. Yes, or a factory, whatever it may be. In this case, I'm imagining it was just old school carpentry, right? So it means the whole sets, everything that went into it, of course, right? So carpentry in general, it'll include the tools, it'll include the carpenter themselves and their ideas, right? That's the efficient cause. You need all those things to bring the chair into being, right? And it could be a factory as well, Alexander. That's totally right. Okay, so, it just depends on the particular chair, doesn't it? But that's something to know about it, of any particular chair. How did it come into being, right? Who made it with what tools? How was it done? Yeah, right. Yeah, efficient, right? You're getting stuff done. That's efficiency means getting stuff done, right? Well, you're asking, how did this get done? How did this get made? Right? There's a movie. This is reminding me of a movie podcast. How did this get made? About bad movies. Formal cause. What would the formal cause be? The formal cause be? Sorry, I amuse myself sometimes. What's the formal cause of the chair? I mean, it's kind of hard, right? Because I had all the definitions up. There's 4 of them. I don't necessarily expect you to right away know remember what they all are. I'm just seeing if anyone does. Well, remember, the formal cause has to do with its structure and design. Right. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Well, the wooden parts, is the wooden part of the formal cause? That's part of the material cause, right? But it definitely is part of its structure that it has four legs like that, right? Basically its shape. I don't even have to put it into words. I can simply talk about its shape. So no, yeah, not wooden. Right? Wooden is the material cause. Oops, let me go back here. The formal cause has to do with its design and its structure, what it's structured like. Right? So for example, take all those parts of the chair, take it apart, and then stick it all back together in a completely different way. You still have the same matter. You still have the same material stuff. Right, it's not just the opposite of causal. Yeah, people always misspell causal as casual. You're not the only one. I've seen it happen in published papers. Sometimes say casual instead of causal. But yes, exactly. It's not just the opposite of that. You know. It's just it's design. Now, so what I'm saying is, look, change the structure of that object right there, right? That chair. You could take it, literally take it apart, still all the same stuff, but you can rearrange it, and now it's not a chair anymore, right? We can think of this in terms of essences, right? Notice the word form. Remember the word form in Plato, right? What makes a thing what it is? Aristotle's still on board with that. He just doesn't think forms exist out there. They only exist in these objects. So the chair has a form of chairness. It has a structure. It has a certain design to it, right? So we can simply say it has a form that it does. And if you mess with the form, right, you redesign the chair, it can look like something completely different and no longer function as a chair. You've changed its form. It no longer has this essence of chairness. Oh, you did mean as opposed to casual. That's very interesting. Okay, yes, sure. But the other way worked as well, so it's very confusing. That's fine, yeah. Okay, sure. Yes. So, yeah. Well, I was saying because the efficient cause is what we normally think of as causal, right? This is what I said, it's confusing in Aristotle. It gets translated as causes, but you got to get the regular cause out of your head. Regular cause that we think of as a cause is just the efficient cause, the first one, right? What caused it to come into being, right? But the second one, formal cause, it's not really a cause in that way. That's why I say, think of it instead of as a formal explanation, right? Let's look at the design and the structure of the object. You see? And then we can see the way in which the design and the structure of the object define it. Right? They give it its form. Again, here's a chair. What makes it a chair? Well, it has the form that chairs do. It's got the right design, the right functionality based on that design. That's what makes it a chair and not something else. If we destroy the chair, well, then we've destroyed its form. It's no longer a chair. It no longer has that structure. So it's not a chair anymore. Right? The supports of the chair can be used for its purpose. Yeah, if you mean that the formal cause is always tied to the final cause, that is right, for Aristotle anyway. And it's most easily seen in everyday objects. This gets problematic when we look at the natural world, but let's put a pin in that for a second. But yes, certainly you can look at a chair and you can see that its design is directly linked with its purpose. Right? So the formal cause is directly linked with its final cause, what its purpose is. Right? Why does the chair have that structure? Why do all chairs have at least certain elements in common that allows us to call them all chairs? Well, they're all designed for a specific purpose, aren't they? Yeah, exactly. So you can look at something's the design of something and infer a purpose. The material cause is the easiest, right? Wood for the chair anyway. Right? That's simply what is it made of. In this case, it's wood. Now notice that the material cause is not always that important when it comes to the formal cause or the final cause. Not always, right? Because you could have a chair still be a chair even though it's made out of metal or something other synthetic stuff like this chair right here, right? It shares a formal cause with the chair on the screen, right? Because they both have a similar structure that is tied with its final cause, its purpose, its function. But it has a different material cause. It's made out of different stuff. And sometimes it's like that. Sometimes you can have two objects have the same purpose, the same general structure, but they're just made out of different stuff. Level of depth. What do you mean by that? I'm not sure if I understand the connection to defining the material. Right, so that gets into a very difficult question, doesn't it? Yeah, how far you're going to go into defining it. And Aristotle wasn't that far, right? He didn't get that far in the actual science of it. He just recognized that these are some of the questions we must ask. So, the very first step for people was to figure out what wood looks like, right? And we needed microscopes to look up really close, and then we can actually see the little cells that wood is made of. Right. Aristotle didn't really know that. He would have just said wood is just wood, right? But then you can zero in and how far can you do that? Yeah, it depends on the context when you're asking what the material cause is, for sure, yes. So, if we're asking it about a macro object at the macro level, then we're just going to go down one level, right? So if we're talking about, a heart, we can talk about a heart and we can say, well, a heart is made out of tissue, right? It's made out of tissue. Now we've explained it. Now you can ask again, okay, what is tissue made of? Well, you zero in on all the molecules, and then what is that made of? Yes, you can always ask a further material cause question. But that doesn't negate the fact that we must ask the question. If we're going to make any scientific progress, we simply have to ask these questions. But you would have to define exactly at what level you're asking the question. So that's a good point to make. Yeah. Real wood versus particle wood. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can make all those distinctions, right? The origin of the material, it's at what level we're dealing with, right? So once you've defined the level, right? So for example, for the chair, if all we care about is the efficient cause of the chair, then we can simply say it was this carpenter with their tools, right? Then we're done. Okay, but now if we're interested in wood, right? The wood that was used for that chair, now we're asking a different question. Now we're just talking about the wood qua wood. We're no longer asking about the chair. Now we're talking about wood, right? Because notice any kind of matter can itself be an object that you ask about. Right? So yes, you can keep going down these levels. Try to keep it as simple as you can for now. For people who are not getting that, that's okay. If you can get what I've got on the screen, then you're good. Okay, this is pretty simple. If you don't ask much more than what's on the screen, it's pretty simple. Of course, it's good to go beyond that. What is its final cause? We already counted for this, right? We already said it's for sitting. Right? This is I made this picture myself. I had to find a cutout, right, to put on the chair, and this is just what I found. Is Justin Bieber. I'm not a believer. I'm sorry. It's just for the example. I just thought it was funny. Right. There you go. Could put it back and forth. But you see the basic idea, right? The final cause. What is its for? What is its purpose? It's for sitting. Okay. And then in order to be able to provide that service that a chair can provide, it's got to have the right kind of design and structure, and it's got to be the right kind of material. Right? I said the material doesn't matter that much. That's true, but it does matter a little bit, right? You can't make a chair out of air. Right? The molecules just won't sit still long enough to be able to do that. So you can't take a bunch of air molecules as your material cause and then put it in the right design. Air molecules will not keep that design. They just will not. Right? You can't sit on it. So it doesn't work. So it needs to be just right. You've got a lot of different choices for your material cause for a chair, of course, but not everything works. And you've got a lot of different choices for its design as well. As long as everything can work together to get to that final cause, then we're good, right? As long as everything is working for that final cause. You know, you feel like it's going to reach your question. I hope so. Well, this is all I have for the 4 causes. Now I'm going to zero in on the formal cause and the material cause, okay? Well, so I guess one thing I will say really quickly, this is very easy when it comes to human-made objects, where it all verges on this final cause, where somebody has in mind a purpose, and then with intelligence gathers materials and has some sort of plan or design in mind, and takes that form from their mind and puts it into the material. It's just like, remember the nous, the cosmic mind that takes all the basic matter and then forms it into stuff. Well, we do that all the time, right? We've got an idea in our head and then we create a reality, right? We've got this idea for, oh, I want to make something that I can sit on. Okay, now I need to get the right materials and put it into the right kind of structure, and then I'll have the thing that I had in mind. It all goes together, and it all sort of presupposes an intelligent being with a purpose in mind. Now, you see how this might get problematic once we start talking about the natural world. Because that's certainly how I was wondering about that. I was going to avoid that for now, but I was kind of wondering if that was your question. Scientifically, right, when you look at, life forms, and you ask the question, how, what explains this life form? Like, let's say we just want the efficient cause, right? How did this life form get here? And you have to tie it to the final cause, like there's some sort of purpose in mind for creatures. Let me say this again. Life forms in the world, like a cat, we might ask, what is it made of? Fine, right? We could look at its formal cause. We could study its structure and its design, right? We can do that scientifically, and we can talk about the efficient cause as well, how cats came to be here, because we have evolution now as an explanatory model that works very, very well, that explains all the data we have very well. I hope I don't need to go into detail for this, and for the purposes of a college class like this, I'm going to assume the truth of evolution as a general theory. Truth isn't even the right word here. It's simply an accepted scientific model of the world, and I'm going to assume the truth of it. That doesn't mean that you have to believe it. You might be a religious person who has religious reasons for not accepting it, or maybe you think you have scientific reasons for not accepting it. That's fine, but since this is a college class, right, colleges teach evolution as a scientific explanation of where life forms came from. So if we're sort of trying to trace the scientific revolution that happened very slowly and then exploded in the scientific era, if we're trying to explain that, all I'm trying to say here is material cause. When we try to look at where try to explain cats, right? We can do anatomy and look at what cats are made of, and we can look at their design and structure, and we can think about how they evolved over millions of years. And we have a pretty good story about that, right? Where the origins of cats. So scientists have no problem with each three of these causes or these types of explanations. The final cause is a little problematic, though, right? Because according to evolution, there wasn't any kind of intelligent being that was trying to create cats with a specific purpose. Except, of course, if it's us, right? We were sort of a natural selection. We were the force that acted on cats. So maybe that's a bad example. Let's look at a more wild animal, not a domesticated animal. Think about a snake in the wild. If you look at this scientifically and you ask about the efficient cause, the material cause, and the formal cause, that still works. That's still how scientists do their work, right? It's still these three basic questions, right? What are the internal components of a snake? What sort of materials are snakes made of? All that stuff, scientific. How did snakes originate, right? We can talk about the evolution of snakes over time. But is there a final cause for snakes? Do snakes serve a purpose that somebody had in mind? Not scientifically, right? So this final cause might be a bit problematic. Right? Of course, some people argue that this is actually a mistake in science, that they ought to be looking at those final causes. But as of now, evolution as a theory does not postulate any sort of purpose that's in anybody's mind. Right? So somebody was thinking, you know what the world needs? The world needs snakes because snakes will do X, Y, Z. Okay, let me make a snake that does X, Y, Z. There you go, snake. Right? That's not the way it worked, at least not according to evolutionary theory. There was nobody had any purpose in mind. Evolution is completely deaf and blind, right? It has no mind at all. It's just a natural process that happens over millions of years that we end up having these cool things that serve multiple purposes. But why they do those things, well, it's what's called a free-floating rationale, right? Creatures don't know why they behave the way they do. As far as evolution is concerned, nobody gave them a specific functionality. It was all just a result of natural forces, right? The way that evolution explains. And again, I'm sort of not going way into how that all works because I'm kind of just hoping and assuming that you already are familiar with that whole story, the whole science part of it. Okay, so just to quickly review, Aristotle, 4 causes, basically 4 ways of looking at things. 3 of them fit quite easily and well within our current scientific paradigm. Final cause is a bit iffy, okay? We have to always take it with a grain of salt, right? So we could say, for example, why are giraffes' necks long, right? So we're asking about its formal cause, and we're asking about its efficient cause, basically, right? We're saying, well, here's this feature of giraffes. They've got long necks. How did that happen? Well, nobody thought, hey, giraffes should have longer necks so that they can reach those apples or whatever they are. Apples aren't that high. Those way up high leaves, right? Nobody had that in mind, according to evolution. It's simply some giraffes had longer necks because of some mutation, whatever it may have been. Those were more likely to survive because they could get more of the goodies, they could stay stronger and then pass on their genes. The shorter neck ones are more likely to die out. This repeats over and over. No great mystery here. We see this over and over. This is not contentious at all. And notice that for that to happen, you don't need anybody thinking or purposely putting that purpose into the giraffe, right? This must be a high leaf eater, and therefore I will give it this formal design, the way that we do with a chair. That just isn't happening in the natural world, right? At least if you're a naturalist. Now, if you are a theist and you think that God did it, then it's a bit different, right? But here I am trying to look at Aristotle as a precursor to modern science and just saying, well, that final cause piece of it is a little bit problematic at the very least. It's something to think about. Parker, there's tons more stuff to say about this, but maybe we'll get back to it when we talk about the existence of God and arguments for the existence of God. So maybe we'll revisit it, unless there's something specific you want to ask. Okay. Okay, so now let's just zero in on form and matter. Okay, so those are two parts of that general four-part system that Aristotle lays out, right, as a way of beginning scientific inquiry about the world around us. Notice he's not doing sort of this dialectic in his head to try to reach an absolutely necessary truth in some immaterial realm. That's not what Aristotle's doing here, right? He's basically just saying, let's explore the world around us and let's get systematic about the kinds of questions we need to be asking about all things, right? And those are his four contenders. Right? He just thinks that everything has a specific purpose. That part is a little bit problematic. I'm not going to say it's false. It's just a philosophically interesting idea that there's some tension there between that and a modern scientific outlook on the world. So form and matter, well, here's some matter, right? Some stuff, some dry clay, some basic matter, just stuff. It's not in any particular shape. It's not serving any particular purpose, right? It's just some basic stuff. But if we go back to the idea that objects can be created with a design or purpose in mind, well, me, I've got a, or you, anyone who can come up with an idea like that could do this. You could take a form in your head, something that you're thinking about, and then impose it on that matter. Right. So maybe you think you're thinking you need a brick to build something. You've got an idea of a brick. Bricks are made out of sometimes clay. So you take some clay and you put a certain shape into it, right? You've shaped it in some way. You've given it a structure, a design. You've given it a formal cause, basically, right? And now you've got what Aristotle calls a substance. So that's just Aristotle's word for specific objects in the world. Everything that's a well-defined object that we can quickly recognize and point to as a thing is a substance, right? So this cup for Aristotle is a substance. I know that's a weird way to use the word. Philosophers love the word substance, and each person seems to have their own definition of substance, and that definition is different from what regular people think of as substance, which is usually some stuff you can ingest or something, right? But no, for Aristotle, this is a substance, because it is matter with a specific form. And that makes it into this thing. So we can go back to Aristotle again, back to Plato again, right? Here's the part where he agrees with Plato, that what do all cups have in common? They have a specific form that is tied to their function, right? Form dictates function, right? Right as I say function, the microphone falls down. So again, right, Plato's idea of a form is what makes all the particulars into what they are, right? What makes each cat a cat? Well, they all share this essence of catness. It's just that for Plato, that essence has some sort of existence in its own rights, apart from all the individual cats. Aristotle is going to say it's not like that. Each cat is a substance. It is made of particular bits of matter. But what they all have in common is these formal features, right? These that have to do with what cats look like, what their shape is, and that has to do with their final cause, right? What their purpose is. Notice you could also take the same matter and give it a different form. Maybe you had something else in mind. Maybe you wanted to create a beautiful object. You could do that as well, right? You could take a form that's in your mind and impose it onto matter and create stuff that you have in mind. So notice that is exactly the model that many of the religions have to explain the world. Right? So it's very Aristotelian in that way, the way that religions sort of have that same idea. That God makes a bunch of stuff and then he creates shapes out of that stuff because he's got something in mind, right? God thought it would be cool to make a human so humans could worship and love him, right? A particular purpose in mind. That's why in mainstream Christianity, many people will say, what is the meaning of a human life? What are we here for? Well, it's to love and worship God, because that's how God made us, right? Impose that specific kind of form onto us, that particular kind of function. That's why you have in the 20th century, you have the existentialists, right? People like Camus and Sartre, who are sort of coming after people like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, who are much more in the scientific frame of mind, who are saying, no, human beings are not created with a particular purpose. It's up to you. Here you are. You're just here for natural causes. Nobody had anything in mind for you. Here you are. You're basically an animal who can think about their own position in life, and you've got absolute freedom to do what you think you ought to do with your life. There's no order imposed from the outside on this view. Okay, that was a little digression, but it's all related, you see. Here, let's get back to this idea, right? The simple idea is, for everyday objects anyway, we can see how this works. We can see how human beings, let's not talk about God for now, at least for human beings, we can take matter, impose a form, and make a particular kind of substance. Oh, I keep clicking the wrong arrow. Okay. Now, notice, we already did this, right? Where we start macro, and then we go smaller and smaller. It works the other way as well, right? So let's say you've taken that clay and you made a brick. You've imposed some sort of form on the matter. But let's say I do that a bunch. Right? Now we've got a bunch of bricks laying around, not doing anything. They're just like the clay, basically. Just a pile of bricks. That can now be my matter once again. I can use those bricks as matter and impose some sort of form. Yeah, you could do that. Certainly, you could just leave them there and say this is art, right? Modern art. But if you do want to impose some sort of form on them to create something, you can do that, right? So now you've got a substance again. You see how that works? Because why is it a substance? Well, it's a item in the world that you can point at and say, there's that thing called a wall. How are we able to point at particular objects in the world? Well, because we know that they have a certain structure and a certain purpose that identifies them as such, right? That's what all walls have in common. They all share this essence. But again, for Aristotle, the essence is always just right there, instantiated in the wall. There's no form of wallness that exists somewhere else, right? So you can just do that. Now, you could even take the wall and do something else with that. Does it become a substance when the collection of matter is defined with a different word? Probably not. What matters is its formal features. What matters is each of its four causes. Yeah, but it's what makes it into a wall is not just that we're calling it a wall, right? It's that it has a certain structure and function now. It's because it has that structure and function that now we can say there's a wall. Whereas before, when they were just laying around, there's no wall there because they don't have that function yet. Even though it's the exact same stuff, right? That's kind of a cool thing about it. It's the same stuff. It is not a wall, right? So this gives us a lot of times we tend to think that we define things purely in terms of what they're made of, but there's much more to it. The functionality part of it is so important, right? What can you actually do with the stuff? Well, now we've got something. We've got a wall. You also could have taken it and made it into something else, right? If you had a different function in mind, you can impose that function on those bricks and make a nice little fireplace, you know? So this is similar to what we were saying earlier, right? Where, look, you could look at, let's say, a heart, a human heart, and talk about its matter. What is it made of? It's not made of some of the other stuff that our body's made of. It's not made of hair. It's not made of bone or teeth. It's not made of whatever your eyes are made of. Isn't it weird? Your eyes are like one of the things that's or visible on the human body. That's quite unlike everything else. It's weird. Anyway, it's not any of those things that hearts are made of. No, they're made out of human tissue. Not very informative answer, but it is true. But now, of course, we can ask, well, what is human tissue made of? That I vaguely defined it, right? Well, then we zero in on those molecules. And those molecules themselves are made of something. So it's the same thing we're seeing here. We see the fireplace, and we can ask what it's made of. Well, it's made out of bricks. Right? It's made out of bricks. But then we can also ask about the bricks. What are the bricks made out of? Well, the bricks are made out of clay material. Right? We can ask about the clay material. What is it made of? Yeah. So what you start to see is this hierarchy, basically. Very simple stuff down here that has its particular functionalities. But then those simple things combine to become more complex. And as they become more complex, you get new functionalities, new properties. It's the same stuff, but because it's combined in a different way, it has a different form, it has a different structure up here, you get new functionalities, right? In the same way that you get a living cell is entirely made out of completely dead, unthinking atoms, right? Just atoms. Right here, pretty simple. They have their functionalities, whatever it is that atoms do. But when those atoms combine in the right way, you get a bunch of molecules, or you get maybe a single cell organism, like a bacteria. If you combine them the right way, hey, that bacteria is just a bunch of molecules. Or sorry, it's just, yeah, that simple life form ultimately is just a bunch of atoms. But they're just arranged in this complex way so that it has different functionalities. And you can go up higher and higher and higher. We'll get back to that. I've got a whole slideshow just on this idea of a hierarchy of existence. In the same way that Plato had this hierarchy of the really, really real stuff is up here, and then things get slowly degraded and less real down here. Here we have another kind of idea which builds up from the basic stuff. Oh my, we've gone far too long on Aristotle, even though I said I wouldn't. Okay. I think that's all I have for it. Yeah, so that was just a short little thing, and we will revisit some of those concepts, some of those ideas. I still feel bad for Aristotle that we're not spending more time, but we should move on. And you could take let's say take a 2-minute break, okay, if you need to go use the bathroom or something or get a drink. I need to switch the slides, and it's slightly more complicated now. Okay, there we go. That wasn't that hard. I'll wait just 30 seconds in case. If anyone had any questions or comments right now, go ahead. Fix my mic. All right. I just need to tape some new Velcro on there. Is basically what it is. Okay, so we're gonna... Oh, wait, I need to... No, I forgot. I need to do something else. Okay. I need to actually link my phone to it so I can control it. Almost there. Okay, well, I'm having a problem getting back. My phone will not allow me to go back to the actual thing. This is really weird. Huh. I do not know how to solve this problem. Except turning my phone off and back on. Okay, so basically, the program that allows me to go to the next page on my slide presentation, because it's too much to try to go into the program to do that, is only linked to the last one that we just did, and I was not able to go back to the menu to select this new one. It was very strange. So we are skipping ahead through time. We're going to go right to Rene Descartes right now. Okay, so many of you may have heard his name before, just so you understand how to pronounce his name. It's not Descartes, right? It's a French name, Descartes, but you can just say Descartes, right? Like day, the word day, daytime, and cart, like a cart that you put something in, right? So Descartes is his name. First name Rene, which in English-speaking countries is often a woman's name, but not so in many European countries where it's a pretty common guy's name. But we're all beyond that now anyway, aren't we? Call yourself whatever you want. Almost there. It's in the actual slideshow what I want to talk about as an introduction. Okay, it's back on. Let me see if I can... Okay, good. It did what I wanted it to do. Now the problem is my phone might die soon. At least get started. Okay, yay, good. Thank you all for your patience there. I'll get all these bugs worked out. Like I said, I've got like 4 different things going on to make sure that it all works correctly. So I appreciate your patience with that kind of stuff. Okay, Descartes, doubt and dualism. Okay, doubt and dualism are 2 main themes in what I'm having you read for Descartes. So hopefully you're able to read those 2 meditations, as they're called, that I posted as a PDF on Canvas. So Descartes' most famous writing is the Meditations. It's a pretty short book. What you're reading is about half of it, maybe a little less. I'm having you read Meditations 1 and 2, where some of the most interesting stuff is happening. Okay, so it's a very, very important piece of philosophical writing. So please, please, please read it, even though it may be difficult sometimes. He's got a pretty nice way of writing, though. He's trying to write for the general public, Rene Descartes. Okay, this is at a time when most people who are scholars and philosophers wrote in Latin, and only other people that spoke Latin and were really smart would get to read your stuff. Rene Descartes, when he wrote his Meditations, he wrote them in French so that everyone could read them, which was a pretty cool thing to do, and it kind of fit the changing times that he was part of, which you don't even really necessarily know what time he existed, so let's look at that. So here we've got the man himself, Rene Descartes. He's always got that expression that he has. I don't know what it conveys. Kind of maybe a little bit of an arrogance, right? Sort of like, yeah, that's right. I'm Descartes. Well, I mean, he is really, really very influential, and in keeping with other philosophers that we've seen, he's not just interested in what we now call philosophy. He was also a mathematician and a scientist at the beginning of the scientific revolution, and helped get that ball rolling, right? So for any of these people that we're looking at, if you're inclined to not be interested in them, just think that without these people or someone like them, all the cool stuff that you enjoy would not be here, right? All your technology, all that stuff would not be possible without all these mathematical and scientific breakthroughs. For example, this little, does everyone remember this from high school? Does anyone know what this is called? A Cartesian coordinate plane, right? Cartesian coordinates. Now, Rene Descartes did not invent this whole thing the way we look at it today, but he invented the idea of having coordinates. And look, it's called Cartesian because that's the Latin version of Descartes turned into an adjective, right? So this thing that you know from high school is actually named after Rene Descartes because he developed one of the prototypes for this sort of thing. Not a good time, yeah. But look what it allows you to do. Remember, we talked about how there's no perfect triangles in the world? Well, now you can represent a perfect triangle by using coordinates, right? So if you want a right angle like this, you see that? We're going from the 6 to the 6, 6 to the 0, 0 to the 6. You can simply represent each of those points. You can say 0, 0, 6, 0, and 0, 6. Oh, what can you not see? Maybe you can't see my mouse on there. Yeah, I do have the mouse on there. I thought previously you were able to see the mouse. Well, here, let me do something really quick. I'm not going to do this all the time. I can definitely go to the actual. Okay. Maybe, can you see now? I can't see your responses, so if you can see it, tell me with the mic. Can you see the mouse now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can only do it from this screen. I'll have to switch back. But all I was saying is, look on this plane. If you try to draw a triangle, it's not going to be perfect because we had that whole problem of no line is ever completely straight, no angle is ever completely right, no angle is ever completely specific the way it needs to for mathematical certainty, right? That's why I said no triangles in the physical world are real, right? To try to motivate what Plato was saying. Plato was saying triangles are real because we know truths about triangles. We know certain things are true, like a squared plus z squared equals c squared. But there are no triangles in the physical world, so this must be true of some transcendent triangle, right? That was Plato's whole idea, his argument for forms that exist separately from the physical world. But notice now what we can at least do is represent a triangle mathematically. because we don't have to draw it. We can simply say, suppose there was a point here at 0, 0. Suppose there was another point here at 0, 6. And then another one here at 6, 0. Right? You can simply write down these three pairs of numbers, 0, 0, 0, 6, and 6, 0. And now you have represented the perfect triangle with the language of mathematics. Okay, now I got to go back. Okay. Okay, yeah, so unfortunately, it's unfortunate that the mouse does not work, that you can't see it on here. That would be so useful. And I'll look at settings later. Anyway, so that's the basic idea behind this. So this is an invention of René Descartes to be able to turn geometry from, writing in the sand like the ancient Greeks would have done, or even on expensive paper and drawing triangles and all that stuff. You don't have to do that. You can just make it all into these mathematical points that you've defined with just these coordinates. Right? You can model all sorts of stuff that way, right? Simply by using numbers. You can use numbers to model reality. Right? Much of science is all about that. It wouldn't have gotten going without that idea that you can model reality mathematically. Because then what happens a little bit after this, Newton, right? Newton takes various aspects of this Cartesian plane idea, and he's able to add to that. He's able to use calculus to be able to model reality over time. So we don't even have to just talk about a single triangle. We can talk about objects moving in time. You need math for that. And Descartes was one of the people that got the ball rolling on that. So that's just one of his claims to fame. In terms of his historical context, so what happened? Right, we did pre-Socratics and Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and now we're skipping a bunch of stuff, a bunch of history. So what happened? Well, the Greek city-states, that whole civilization fell apart, right? Not that the people were destroyed or anything like that. This sort of loose federation of Greek states that existed as the Greek Empire, that was no longer organized in such a way to be a unified sort of principality or nation or anything like that. It sort of fell apart into its own separate little states again. But then another power rose up, of course, Rome. Rome took over a bunch of Europe and Asia Minor and Africa, right? Took over a bunch of stuff, and so Romans also took that over the Greek area, and Romans loved the culture of the Greeks, and Romans took so much of the Greek culture and appropriated it to their own culture by changing it slightly. For example, the Roman pantheon, the gods that the Romans worshipped, were basically, many of them were just updated, rebranded, renamed Greek gods. Right? And they also like their art and their philosophy. So there's a lot of Greek stuff gets into the Roman psyche. And the Romans also bring Greek culture to places like Jerusalem, right? If you think of that whole area as the birth of Christianity. So in that context, you had all these people, Jewish people, being subjugated by this Roman authority that had come in and taken over. But that Roman authority disseminated all these Greek ideas with the Jews, so that Jewish people could combine Jewish ideas from Judaism with various aspects of Greek thoughts, and you can see those being merged together into Christianity, into the Bible. So, for example, you can see in Paul's letters, so one part of the New Testament are the epistles, as they're called. They're letters written by this early Christian named Paul, who's writing to these churches about various different things. And one of the things Paul talks about is this idea that there's a perfect copy of the earthly temple. The earthly temples that exist here on earth are all imperfect copies of this perfect temple that exists out there somewhere. Sound familiar? Right? And this was not just Paul's idea. Lots of people at that time had this idea that there's this realm where there was a perfect archetype for everything down here. Yeah. And there's also the perfect priest exists up there, upstairs, I almost said. Right? Paul would have said that was Jesus, right? We've got our earthly priests who are not perfect, but then there's the perfect one that exists in this other realm. That is only just one example. And you can see the whole medieval period was a lot of working this out. A lot of Christians going, wow, a lot of this Plato stuff really works really well with Christianity. And tries to show how they sort of go together, right? Now I'm saying this is what I was saying last week, I think. So it's not a surprise to me that you find all these Platonic elements in Christianity. It's precisely because Christianity was formed at a time when there was this huge influx of Greek ideas into Judaic Jewish thinking. So it sort of makes sense. So we have the medieval period, right, rise of Christianity, medieval period, and then the medieval period goes into the Renaissance era and into the scientific revolution, right? So it's sort of a cliche to say that not much was happening in the medieval period, though now, not much happening in terms of scientific or mathematical or philosophical progress. That's what I mean. Now, there's going to be lots of exceptions to that, and lately especially it's become pretty... With some people anyway, some people really like to say that the whole idea of Dark Ages is a complete myth. I tend to go somewhere in between. Lots of stuff was happening in the medieval period, and there was progress made in various fields. But on the whole, most of philosophy, like I said, was backwards looking. It was looking at the Bible and looking at Plato and maybe Aristotle, to create these systems, but they're basically, they can't really go beyond what the Catholic Church was saying at that time, right? So the Catholic Church exists precisely to make sure that there aren't all these different versions of Christianity going on. So the Catholic Church has an authority over, most of Europe at least. Christianity can only look like this. So, of course, philosophically, how can you go beyond that, right? If you're reigned by a certain dogma, if you're not allowed to come up with new ideas, if it's all supposed to be within these neat little confines, then it's hard to make progress, right? That's assuming, of course, that there's more to know. For many of these people, we were done. We figured it. We figured everything out as human beings, right? So, in many cases, that's the medieval mindset. We're sort of done figuring stuff out. We've got the Bible, we've got Plato. That's all we really need. Always the church. Yeah, and I don't want to make this into a big church bashing thing or religion bashing thing, right? I think I am talking about things that are just historically well known and not that controversial. Catholic means universal. Right, so the history of Catholicism is basically early Christianities. There were lots of different communities all over Asia Minor and Africa and Southern Europe. Little communities. They didn't all agree. They didn't all have the same text. They weren't all using. The New Testament hadn't been put together yet. So you've got all these different things floating around. People have different ideas. Even Paul, who's writing these letters that eventually became canonical and got put in the Bible. If you read those letters in the Bible, in there itself, at the beginning of Christianity, you have Paul talking about all these different versions of Christianity. Right? So Catholicism says, let's have none of that. Let's get together. Let's let's do a meeting with all the most powerful people and agree on the basics of Christianity. And let's make it a universal religion where we're all believing the same thing. So the word Catholic means universal, right? So it was specifically designed to be a one-size-fits-all, that Christianity should be neatly defined in terms of these dogmas that we can't go beyond. That's what Christianity shall be. And so if anything goes beyond that, that's frowned upon. Not only is it that you have to rely on what's in the Bible and never contradict that, it's also the Catholic church's interpretation of the Bible, right? So it became very commonplace to assume, for example, that the heavenly spheres, the things out there in the cosmos, like the moon, that they are, because they are farther away from us and closer to this realm of perfection, that they themselves are perfect spheres. Then Galileo comes around and shows with a telescope, sorry, the moon is not perfectly smooth. There's all sorts of indentations. It's not this perfect sphere that you think. People hated that. They did not want to believe their eyes, right? You got in trouble for doing that sort of stuff. So we have this medieval period where things, to a certain extent anyway, stagnate. To a certain extent. So I'm just saying, not just saying a blanket statement that it was just a terrible period where nothing happened. That's not the case. But everyone agrees that the Renaissance was important precisely because it changed the overall feel of things, of the culture and the society. All right, the Renaissance, it's a rebirth where people once again look back to the ancients for inspiration and no longer felt as scared to go beyond what the church dogma was, or go beyond religious themes in art, for example. If you look at a lot of early Renaissance arts, why we call it Renaissance art rather than medieval art, the subject matter. Right? A lot of Renaissance art wasn't just about illustrating stories from the Bible or showing yet another magnificent picture right, of Jesus and Mary or something like that. In the Renaissance, people were starting to feel comfortable exploring pagan themes again, right? Pagan meaning non-Christian. And so we started having more pictures of Greek gods. We started having more pictures of naked people, right? Just art is not necessarily just there for the glory of God anymore in the Renaissance period. Right? There's a rebirth of art where people are willing to explore different ideas again. And that itself becomes a kind of inspiration for the scientific revolution, where the same thing happens. Right? Where people go back to the ancients and think, well, what if we just kept going? What if rather than saying, well, Plato and the Bible, and that's it, right? Or Aristotle, sometimes the theologians seem to like Plato, and the Christian scholars or scientists, whatever you want to call them, seem to be more into Aristotle. But what if instead of that, we just looked at all of them and we kept going? We see that our quest for knowledge is not done. There's so much more to learn about the world. What do? That's the scientific revolution. So several factors led into that. We probably won't even get into Descartes, but I like setting the historical context. So just so you see the little chart here. All right, so we were in antiquity, talking about Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and the pre-Socratics. We skipped the Middle Ages, then there's the Renaissance, and then the modern period, starting roughly with Descartes, really a little bit before Descartes, because we had other people as well. That's roughly about it, okay? So you know where we're at. And then, of course, now we are in the postmodern era. Okay, so what was happening? What led to this scientific revolution, apart from what had just happened, the Renaissance, that certainly helped. But one of the major things that helped at this time was the Gutenberg printing press. This might sound boring, but at the time this would have been very exciting. Most people didn't have books. They're expensive. People certainly mostly did not have Bibles, right? To go back to that again, medieval period, who had the Bibles? Well, it was the churches, right? And so you have to trust that they're telling you what's in the Bible, and you have to trust their interpretation, right? You go to church and you have your priest tell you the meaning of life because he knows what's up, right? And of course the priest has to listen to the Pope. Right? So you got the Pope, you got the priest, and then the priest will tell you what the Bible is and what it means. Okay? So the printing press, this printing press that allowed for very, very quick and cheap books to be created. Like suddenly you can make lots of books very, very quickly. And then suddenly knowledge becomes democratized, right? Now suddenly knowledge is available to the multitudes, not just to the people at the top who can afford it because they're rich or because they're in a position of authority like in the church, right? Or you're a scholar or something like that. Books used to be a huge privilege. The printing press made it accessible to more and more people. And it also meant that knowledge could disseminate and spread faster. So if you want to think about huge inventions, I mean, you realize how huge the internet is. Now, I was alive when there was no internet, or at least there was no internet available to everyone yet. I actually saw that happen. Maybe you already take it for granted, but the printing press was like the internet of the time. It changed everything, right? So not only could lots of ordinary people now sometimes read the Bible for themselves and come up with their own conclusions, but you could also publish more books, spread your knowledge around. A book could travel from one country to another very easily, right? Things can get reprinted somewhere else. Suddenly knowledge simply becomes more available, right? Because what else are you, I mean, if you're a medieval peasant and you're walking around with no access to books or learning, you'll never know anything besides your own little life, right? You never get to see a bigger picture or anything like that. All you will ever know is what the church tells you. Now everything has changed. Now knowledge is for everyone. So that was very important. Right? And I'm sure you could think of all sorts of ways in which that changed the scene. Just having books more readily available, more easily made. We also had the beginning of the Reformation period. So if you don't know this, if you don't remember this from history, this was very important, right? People like Martin Luther, who were starting to simply disagree with the Catholic Church. Right? That's really what it came down to. There had been this structure of authority, like I said, the Catholic Church on top, then everyone else just has to listen, and even the interpretation of the Bible becomes simply something that the people in charge have, right? So the Pope and all the upper echelon can define what the Bible means, and what you ought to believe, and what the correct practices are for Christians. Martin Luther, not just for religious reasons, by the way. These things are always very complicated, and sometimes I wish I'd been a historian, but because it's very interesting. So there's all sort of political stuff going on in Europe as well that plays into this change. But the main thing here is Martin Luther is a person who was able to challenge the Catholic Church, and he did not die because of it. So he was able to challenge the Catholic Church on certain things. Oops, let me go back. Famous things are like selling of indulgences, right? Where the Catholic Church would say that you could get a really bad sin forgiven as long as you gave them some money, right? Basically. And Luther just thought that was terrible. And he also didn't like all the sort of, if you look at the Vatican, even still now, very fancy, right? All this gold and very sumptuous stuff and smoke and costumes. And he just didn't think that element was really spiritual enough, that was too flashy and too earthly and too glitzy. The original Chad, yeah. You make a meme. Make a Martin Luther meme. Chad Luther versus the guy. So that was very important. And just, for all of Europe to know that this happened. That, wait a minute, we can challenge the church? Right? And we can do it simply by looking at the Bible? One of Luther's main arguments behind his case that he was able to use is the Bible itself, because the Catholic Church had already been, you could say they could manipulate what they wanted to get the result that they wanted. And if nobody ever looks at the Bible, then you can get away with it. Luther said, you know what? The Bible is actually the only authority, right? That's something that was divinely inspired by God. Catholic Church, that's just an institution of human beings. That's why Martin Luther became famous for the saying "sola scriptura," right? Only the scriptures matter. So, I mean, from my perspective, he's just taking another dogma for another dogma. But historically, that was very important because he's able to argue against the Catholic Church by using the Bible, right? So you're not just completely saying, "Oh, Christianity is false." He was not trying to say that, right? Martin Luther was a Christian. He started Protestantism. We've got lots of Baptist churches around here in Humboldt. Those are Protestant churches, right? That's the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism. For many Christians, Catholicism isn't even Christianity. That's how crazy it's gotten. They think it's so far removed. And so Protestantism, because of Martin Luther, really did its job. Virgin Mary, that's good. Okay, where was I? Okay, so yeah, the Reformation, important for all these reasons, right? Basically breaking through dogma, opening new doors to new avenues, new things to explore. Of course, the upshot of that, what happened because of this, is exactly how it used to be. It's exactly what the Catholics said to begin with, right? The Catholics said, when this was all starting to happen, there was an argument that said, look, if you destroy Catholicism, if you undermine Catholicism, then there will be no authority for what counts as Christianity. There will be no central authority to define it. And what will happen is it'll split into a million different factions. Right? And that's exactly why the Catholic Church was invented in the first place, to unify them all into one big Catholic universal religion. And now what do we have now? Thousands upon thousands of different denominations of Christianity. Many of them agree on basics, but many of them disagree very much about very important things. There are even cultural Christians now, what are called cultural Christians, people who participate in the culture of Christianity and who like the Bible and who like going to church. They just don't take it literally anymore, right? That's happened now as well. But you've got all your different Presbyterians, you've got your different evangelicals, you've got your different Protestants and Baptists, you've got your different Pentecostals. Do Jehovah's Witnesses count as Christian? You know, there's all sorts of stuff now, right? That's exactly what happened. So the central hold of the Catholic Church was destroyed through the Reformation. The Catholic Church survived, of course, but Christendom was no longer this one big monolithic thing that covered all of Europe. And now people had the freedom to define the religion for themselves, and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Copernicus publishes something after his death, I believe. The world wasn't ready to hear it. He suggests heliocentrism, which was not what was accepted by the Catholic Church at the time. Right? The Catholic Church still viewed the world as right here, right? Sort of in that Platonic order of things, where at the bottom sort of, and then below there's, down there, things are even worse. It's hell, right? And up there, things are getting nicer and nicer, and we've got these beautiful celestial spheres up there like the sun. And the sun actually, goes like that around the earth. Right? Yeah, that's what it looks like, right? So it kind of makes sense, but Copernicus showed that a lot of the problems inherent in geocentrism would be avoided with heliocentrism, right? So what are some of the problems associated with geocentrism, right? So let's assume for a second that the Earth is the center of the universe. Well, one of the things that we notice is that some of these planets that we see up there, the Greeks call them wanderers. That's where the word planet comes from. They wander because they're a little bit different from the stars, right? The stars are all fixed at any point point of the night. Like they'll slowly change. If you see a time lapse, you'll see the stars go around as well as the Earth is rotating. But if you just look at the sky, you won't see that. But you'll see that whereas the stars are all moving very slowly all together, some of these points of light sort of have their own path. They call them wanderers. That now we have the word planet. Right? They didn't know exactly what they were, but one of the problems is, why do they have their own course? And why does it look like sometimes when a planet is moving on its own like this, sometimes it looks like it goes back a little bit, and then it keeps going? Well, that's weird, isn't it? That's called the retrograde motion of the planets. So if you were to do this as an experiment, track a planet long enough, you'll see that it's moving and moving across the sky, just like you would expect if it's making these big circles around the sky, right? Around the Earth. So if you imagine Earth is in the middle and the stars are going around and the planets are going around, you'd expect them just to go like this in these circles. That's not what we see. We see them go back a little bit and then keep going. Sometimes we see them go back, go again, but then go back a little bit again before moving on. Very, very weird. If the Earth is in the center of the universe, or at least the solar system, and the planets are going around, why don't they just keep going? They should just keep going in circles, but that's not what we see. So geocentrism could not handle that, but heliocentrism makes a lot more sense out of that, because suddenly everything has changed. Where we're seeing the world from is itself not a fixed place, right? The sun is fixed. The Earth is going around it, while planets are also going around it. And since we're both moving at the same time, the movement of the planets is very unpredictable. It's very strange to us, because the planets are moving at the same time that we're moving. But on that theory, we can make much more sense of the planets wandering back and forth like that, because it all has to do with how we're moving in conjunction with how that planet is moving. Okay, so I was just giving you the basic argument for heliocentrism. It just made a lot more sense out of the data. Right? It's just a simpler explanation. Because otherwise, what you have to do is, before this, you had the Ptolemaic model based on Ptolemy's idea, and Ptolemy was a geocentrist, so he thought it was the Earth was right here in the middle. He had to come up with a theory to explain why planets did this. And he came up with this idea of epicycles, that here's the Earth, center of the universe, right? So now I'm talking about Ptolemy, not Copernicus, right? Let me go back here. So before Copernicus, who said, let's make the sun at the center, you had the Ptolemaic model, which is planets are going around the Earth. Now, to explain why they sometimes go back, they have this idea of an epicycle. They imagine, well, they are going in circles, but every now and then they'll make a little loop-de-loop, right? And they keep going. It's called an epicycle. And sure enough, that would explain why it looks like they're going backwards for a second, right? Because they're doing a little loop. Of course, sometimes they go backward, they go forward, and they go backwards really quick again. So they had to postulate epicycles within the epicycles. They had to imagine, okay, here it's going around and around, and suddenly it's got to do a little loop-de-loop, but within that loop-de-loop, it's got to make multiple loop-de-loops as well. Very complicated, right? So you've got this data, you see the planets do this weird motion. How do you explain it? The old system said, well, these epicycles, we don't know why they do those epicycles, but they do. Or the new model that says, no, everything is simply moving in nice little circles, just as you would expect. It just looks weird because we're moving too. We're not in the middle of the solar system standing still. So it's an early example of where you could say, well, the simpler explanation is the one that's preferable. Here's a simple explanation. We are simply not in the center of the solar system. So it's a little bit after this. So it's this world that Descartes is born into, right? So the world has already been changing quite a bit, sort of getting the stage ready for him. Right? Scientific revolutionary scientific ideas are in the air, right? So Copernicus's idea is in the air. It's there, even though the Catholic Church is still officially against it. It's culturally available. Now, Copernicus already had a pretty decent way of explaining those epicycles. It turned out it didn't work quite as well as you would have hoped. It wasn't until Kepler came along and he could really model, he could really predict why they move the way they do, because he got rid of the idea that the planets are moving in perfect circles. And again, this idea of perfection in those outer realms that comes right from Plato and other ancient thinkers, right? So people for the longest time assumed the planets have to be going in perfect circles. It was just dogmatic thinking. They just simply thought it has to be that way. Kepler suggests, you know what? Everything actually works a lot better. We can actually exactly predict the way the planets move if instead of perfectly circular orbits, they're instead these elliptical kind of orbits. That actually makes a whole lot more sense. And we all agree with this now, of course, right? But they had to do this with very limited data, right? They had to do this all based on people recording the positions of the stars and the planets every day. So it sort of depend on how much data you had. It was either, oh man, I can't believe I forget this. It's either Copernicus or Kepler who had access to just stacks and stacks of raw data that someone had recorded of the position. So then you can look mathematically at where the planets are each time, right? Over time. Now you can see then, once you start bringing math into it, right? Where you have real data about where the planets and the stars are on every night for a long time, for a long period of time. And then you can see that over time, which ones are moving where and how fast and how much they're moving back and forward again. So then eventually, once the math gets good enough, we can really model all that perfectly. And it turns out that, yes, with an elliptical orbit around a sun, it all makes way more sense. So just showing the difference there, right? Instead of these nice little circles, and by the way, back the circle, because Copernicus did not quite want to go all the way with an elliptical thing, but he did have to jiggle the system a little bit to make those epicycles work better. He had the cycles be offset a little bit. That's why doesn't look like a perfect target in there, right? Things are off a little bit. Anyway, Kepler changed all that by suggesting that planets actually go around the sun in more of this kind of a motion. So this is what we are doing, right? Going around the sun while other planets are doing it too. And so when we look at other planets moving while we're moving, their movements look weird and unpredictable. But they're perfectly predictable if you assume that we are not in the middle of the solar system. If you assume that we're moving, then it actually all makes sense. Oh, I'm going over time already. Okay, let me finish off historical context and then I'll let you go, okay? We're almost done here. So then famously, people have probably heard of this, right? So all this new science is going on. Copernicus got away with it because he didn't publish it until after his death. So obviously he didn't publish it, but it got published after he died. Galileo, he wrote this book looking at different points of view, basically. He articulated what the geocentric model would look like and the arguments for it. And then he tried the heliocentric model and looked at the arguments for that. But even that did not sit well with the Catholic Church. Okay, even just suggesting that this is a possibility was no good. And so they forced him to recant, right? They forced him to say, oh, it's not true what I said. Right? Sad thing that had to happen. But that's the situation that we're looking at, right? The Catholic Church was in charge. It had all the answers. It tells you what the world is like. It tells you the nature of reality. It tells you the nature of the universe and the cosmos. It knows all these things. Right? It knows that the earth is in the center. You must believe that, right? So in this time, for renowned scientists to come along and even suggest an alternate possibility, he wasn't even going out there evangelizing for it. He was simply saying, well, here's this other model. What about that? Even that was no good, and they forced him to just disavow it and to not talk about it again. Okay. Well, and then finally, when we really get going, two people independently, the rationalist philosopher Leibniz, and then Newton, Isaac Newton, everybody knows. Isaac Newton was also a philosopher, because there was no distinction yet between real science and philosophy. But Newton became more known as a scientist because he was more interested in those aspects that we now associate with science. So it makes sense. But his book, his work was called philosophy. He was called a philosopher, but he's called a natural philosopher, right? So Leibniz did not do as much natural philosophy. He was very interested in what we now think of philosophy, but also in math. And so Leibniz and Newton both came up with this idea of calculus. And calculus, you can do all sorts of things with it, but the one that I always latch on to is the ability to describe movement over time, right? The trajectory of something over time, to be able to have a formula to describe that, to have a mathematical formula, for example, to describe the orbit of the Earth around the sun, things like that. So it's really weird that they independently invented this calculus, which again, it's another mental technology is what it is, right? Just like geometry was. It's a kind of technology that allows us to do things. And somehow they did it independently, but they both thought the other ripped the other person off. Right? So there's a famous rivalry here, famous debates. Did they both do it independently, or did one of them rip the other person off? Right? They had slightly different ways of doing it, but it would have made sense historically if they both came up with it. Calculus was basically something waiting to be invented. It just made sense at that time. There was all sorts of problems that the standard stuff could not deal with, so calculus made perfect sense. But at the same time, it's very high order, very complicated stuff. Very interesting that two human beings at the same time claimed to have independently come up with it. Boom. Okay, mic drop, so I guess we're done. Okay. Not the kind of mic drop I was hoping for, but I could keep going, but we're past time. So thank you for your patience. Thanks for sticking around. I'll see you on Thursday. I'll be here for a second if you want to say anything else. Yeah. Make sure you're getting into Canvas and doing the stuff that I'm putting up there. So there's going to be actually a quiz on Descartes. You might want to wait a little bit to take it until after Thursday. Yep. See y'all later.
You are currently the only person in this conference.